It's 7:15 p.m. on a rainy Thursday evening in a suburban strip mall just outside Columbus, Ohio. If you walk up to the host stand of the local casual steakhouse, you'll find a 40-minute wait. The dining room is a wall of sound, the clinking of glasses, the hum of cross-table conversations, and a kitchen staff operating at maximum capacity. The parking lot out front is completely packed. But if you look closer, the picture shifts. Underneath one of those booths, a diner quietly pulls out their phone, shields the screen, and checks a banking app. They are staring at a checking account balance that will barely cover the upcoming utility bill and next week's groceries. For the past few years, the economic conversation across the United States has been completely singular. The middle class is under historic pressure. Housing is largely unaffordable. Childcare costs match mortgage payments, and basic auto insurance notices read like luxury invoices. By almost every subjective measure, everyday Americans report feeling exhausted, squeezed, and financially broken. Yet, if everyone is struggling, why is it still so hard to get a table on a Thursday night? The numbers tell us one story. The kitchen table tells us another. But the local restaurant tells a completely different tale altogether. This is the great American paradox of 2026, a country where consumer confidence remains deeply shaken, yet the dining rooms remain packed. It is a disconnect that leaves millions of people wondering if they are the only ones struggling to manage a budget, or if the entire economy is operating on an illusion. The answer isn't that Americans suddenly found a hidden reserve of wealth. It is far more complex, hidden beneath a fundamental shift in how we view work, time, and the purpose of a single dollar. To understand why the restaurants are full, we first have to understand what happens when hard work no longer buys the American dream, and what people choose to buy instead. To understand why Sarah is sitting in a crowded restaurant on a Thursday night, you have to look at her kitchen counter the next morning. Lying next to her coffee maker is a stack of paper invoices and open envelope tabs. There is a home insurance renewal notice showing a 22% increase over last year, a monthly utility statement that seems to hit a new record high every season, and a credit card bill showing a balance that refuses to budge. On paper, Sarah and her husband are doing everything right. They earn a combined household income that puts them squarely in the American middle class. 10 years ago, this exact salary would have easily provided a comfortable life, a modest savings account, annual vacations, and a sense of predictable stability. But today, their budget is permanently redlined. The primary problem isn't a lack of effort, it's the quiet erosion of their financial margin. Every major, non-negotiable expense has slowly crept upward, claiming a larger share of their bi-weekly paycheck before they ever have a choice in how to spend it. The mortgage, the health insurance deductibles, the auto insurance premiums, and the cost of after-school care have created a high, rigid floor of fixed expenses. But the strangest part is what happens when Sarah tries to cut back on the variables. For months, the conventional financial advice was simple: stop eating out, buy raw ingredients, and cook at home. So Sarah tried. But walking into the local supermarket now feels less like an errand and more like a psychological battle. She watches the digital register ticker climb past $120 for 3 bags of basic groceries, chicken breast, a carton of eggs, some fresh produce, and a few household essentials. Suddenly, the financial penalty for giving up and going out begins to look entirely different. When a basic, unstructured trip to the grocery store costs over $100 and requires an hour of prep and cleanup, the actual economic difference between cooking a meal at home and spending $85 at a casual neighborhood restaurant shrinks dramatically. The visible problem isn't that Americans have lost their sense of financial discipline. It's that the baseline cost of survival has become so expensive that the small luxuries are the only things left that feel affordable. To understand why this paradox is playing out in strip malls and downtown districts across the country, we have to look at a structural shift under the hood of the American household budget. It's a mechanism that financial analysts refer to as the rising fixed cost floor. A generation ago, the non-negotiable costs of survival, rent or a mortgage, basic healthcare, utilities, and dependable transportation consumed roughly half of an average worker's take-home pay. The remaining 50% was a flexible buffer. It could be saved for a rainy day, invested in a child's future, or used for lifestyle choices. Today, for households like Sarah's, that fixed cost floor has risen to absorb 75 to 80% of their entire income before they ever make a single discretionary decision. This shift changes the math of daily life completely. When your fixed costs are that high, you are living in a permanently compressed space. If Sarah saves every scrap of her remaining 20%, skipping every night out, avoiding convenience, and meticulously budgeting down to the penny, the total amount she saves at the end of the month might amount to an extra $100 or $200. In the current housing and investment climate, that extra $200 is structurally insignificant. It won't buy a house in a safe school district when average home prices require six-figure down payments. It won't fix a broken healthcare safety net, and it certainly won't fund a traditional retirement. And this is where the story stops being about money. When long-term milestones become mathematically unachievable, the psychology of the consumer pivots. People stop saving for a future they can no longer afford, and they start spending for the present they have to live through right now. This behavior is driven by what can be called the exhaustion tax. After a 45-hour workweek, navigating flat wages, corporate restructuring anxiety, and the daily mental friction of a high-cost life, the human brain demands a relief valve. An $85 dinner at a casual restaurant isn't a sign of financial irresponsibility or luxury wealth. It is a highly calculated, short-term purchase of sanity. It is the price of buying back 2 hours where nobody has to chop vegetables, wash dishes, or feel like a machine grinding away just to pay the landlord. The restaurant rooms are full because Americans are quietly paying an exhaustion tax, trading long-term savings goals that feel like an illusion for a tangible hour of peace they can see, taste, and experience tonight. To understand if Sarah's situation is just an isolated story or a nationwide reality, we have to look at the hard, cold macroeconomic data. When you zoom out from a single suburban strip mall to the entire map of American consumer behavior, the paradox is verified by the numbers. The Bureau of Labor Statistics tracks exactly where the American paycheck goes every single month. According to recent consumer expenditure surveys, a historic threshold has been crossed. The average American household now spends a massive portion of its total food budget on food away from home, meaning restaurants, fast food, and delivery services, frequently rivaling or exceeding the amount spent on traditional groceries. But how is this level of hospitality spending possible if consumer sentiment surveys consistently show that Americans feel deeply pessimistic about their financial future? The answer is revealed when you look at where that money is actually coming from. It isn't coming from surging checking accounts or healthy cash buffers. According to data from the Federal Reserve, total credit card debt in the United States has climbed to unprecedented, record-breaking heights. Millions of middle-class households are leaning heavily on plastic to maintain their everyday lives. At the very same time, the personal savings rate tracked by the Bureau of Economic Analysis has dipped significantly below its historical long-term average. The charts paint a clear, unvarnished picture. We are looking at two sides of the same coin. Americans aren't dining out because they have extra cash to burn. They are dining out while simultaneously draining their savings accounts and expanding their revolving debt balances. The data proves that the crowded restaurant room isn't an indicator of structural wealth. It is an economic coping strategy funded by lines of credit. When you sit in a packed casual restaurant or look at your own credit card statements after a long week, it is easy to feel a quiet, heavy sense of personal shame. We have been conditioned for generations to believe that financial struggle is entirely an individual failure, a clear symptom of poor discipline, too many streaming subscriptions, or a basic inability to say no. But this is the point where the narrative shifts from economics to psychology. We are witnessing a profound psychological shift occurring across the American middle class, a collective retreat from the future. When the foundational milestones of adulthood, owning a home in a safe neighborhood, starting a family without overwhelming debt, or retiring with a sense of security, become fundamentally uncoupled from a standard 40-hour workweek, human behavior changes. People do not give up because they lack discipline. They give up when effort no longer connects to reward. If saving 10% of a modest paycheck for 15 years still leaves a family completely locked out of the modern housing market, the rational mind stops prioritizing the year 2050. It starts prioritizing this weekend. This is the psychological reality of survival mode. A household with no margin does not make long-term plans. It makes it to Friday. And on Friday night, that compressed financial horizon looks like a plate of warm food that someone else prepared, served in a brightly lit room filled with other people who are also tired of running the numbers. This spending isn't financial ignorance. It is a calculated decision to trade an impossible macro dream for a tangible micro escape. But not everyone agrees with this explanation. While millions view this short-term spending as a completely logical response to a broken formula, an equally vocal crowd looks at these crowded dining rooms and reaches a completely different conclusion about modern financial discipline. This is where the argument gets uncomfortable. Because if you look at those crowded dining rooms through a different lens, a completely alternative narrative emerges, one centered not on structural math, but on personal responsibility. There is a highly vocal counterargument in America today that suggests the modern affordability crisis is, at least in part, entirely self-inflicted. Critics of modern consumer behavior point out that previous generations navigated high inflation, deep recessions, and double-digit mortgage rates without the benefit of door-to-door meal delivery apps, $85 casual dinners, or a rolling list of monthly streaming services. From this perspective, the middle class hasn't been trapped by the economy. They have trapped themselves through lifestyle inflation, a refusal to sacrifice, and a culture of immediate gratification amplified by social media feeds. One side calls it a broken system. The other calls it bad choices. To understand the full truth, we have to acknowledge where both sides are right. Personal choices absolutely matter. Choosing to run up high-interest revolving credit card debt for non-essential luxuries or lifestyle experiences is a direct path to financial vulnerability. Discipline is still a requirement for individual stability. But the discipline argument completely misses the changing scale of the problem. If Sarah eliminates every single restaurant meal, cancels every app subscription, and cuts her variable spending down to absolute zero, she might save an extra $300 or $400 a month. While that is a meaningful cash buffer, it is completely structurally powerless against a housing market where the median home price has decoupled from median local wages, or a healthcare landscape where a single unexpected medical deductible can erase an entire year of careful savings. The discomfort of this debate exists because we are looking at two separate realities. Personal behavior dictates whether you can make it to the end of the month, but structural math dictates whether you can make it to the next phase of life. When people see packed restaurants, they think they are seeing a failure of personal discipline. What they fail to see is that for many households, traditional financial discipline no longer buys the future it used to. If we leave the conversation at a permanent standstill between structural failure and personal choices, we remain completely frozen. The blame game doesn't pay the electric bill. So how does a modern household navigate an economy where the traditional rules of saving and success have been fundamentally rewritten? The first step toward financial clarity is separating structural macroeconomics from short-term emotional behavior. If you sit down and look closely at your household bank statements, you will see that the bills growing the fastest, your home insurance premiums, utility rates, health deductibles, and rent are entirely structural. You cannot coupon your way out of a 20% car insurance spike. You cannot discipline your way out of a rising fixed cost floor. If you feel an unyielding pressure on your budget, stop blaming your personal character. The math of basic American survival has simply become more expensive, and that is not your fault. The path forward requires a cold, honest look at the remaining numbers. While you cannot control the fixed cost floor, you must take absolute ownership of your variable habits. The real clarity begins when we audit what that $85 casual dinner is actually buying. It isn't just food. It is an emotional relief cost. It is a temporary purchase of peace after an exhausting week. Acknowledging this fact removes the personal shame, but it also restores your power. If those short-term micro-escapes are being funded by high-interest revolving credit card debt, they aren't actually solving the exhaustion tax. They are compounding it, adding interest to next month's pressure. A practical map for the current economic landscape does not offer the false promise that skipping a few dinners will suddenly buy you a house tomorrow. It doesn't insult your intelligence with generic advice. Instead, it asks you to consciously draw a line between survival costs and relief costs. Protect your liquid cash margin fiercely, target high-interest debts aggressively, and stop using plastic to fund short-term comfort. You cannot single-handedly fix the American macroeconomy, but by refusing to let temporary escapes compromise your immediate security, you finally regain control of your own kitchen table. It is now 9:15 p.m. back at the suburban strip mall outside Columbus, Ohio. Sarah and her husband pull out of the restaurant parking lot, leaving behind the warm glow, the ambient chatter, and the 40-minute wait list that is still ticking away at the host stand. As the car turns onto the dark highway toward home, the temporary sanctuary fades, and the immediate reality of modern American life settles back into the cabin. Tomorrow morning, the kitchen counter will still hold the high-interest credit card statements, the rising home insurance premiums, and the utility notices. The structural math of their budget remains entirely unchanged. But for 2 hours, they weren't just economic inputs grinding away against an unforgiving fixed-cost floor. They were a family sharing a meal, buying back a brief window of dignity in an economy that continuously demands their exhaustion. The illusion of the crowded dining room is finally unmasked. Those full tables across America are not a sign of a roaring, carefree middle class, nor are they simply proof of a generation that has completely lost its financial discipline. Instead, they are a visual symptom of a much deeper transition. A quiet, collective recognition that when the long-term promises of the American dream are priced out of reach, a household must find value in the present. The American middle class has not stopped working, and they have not stopped caring. They have simply looked at the broken formula of their survival math and decided that sometimes 2 hours of peace tonight is worth far more than a single dollar that can no longer buy a home tomorrow. The restaurants remain full because, in a world where the big things feel impossible to control, everyday Americans are choosing to control the small, meaningful moments left at the table. We want to hear your story. Look at your own household finances and the visual reality of your community this year. Do you think this is a personal discipline problem? Or has the structural math of American life completely changed? Which specific bill has placed the heaviest pressure on your kitchen table this year? Is it rent, groceries, home insurance, healthcare, or debt? If this deep dive brought clarity to the invisible pressures on your budget, consider hitting the like button and subscribing to Forensic Everyday America. We will continue to pull back the curtain on the real numbers, the hidden mechanisms, and the true emotional cost of modern life.